As I stand here in November recording this video, I know you'll be watching it in December. The reason why I can communicate how much time has passed since recording so simply is because we, in the current day and age of the world, predominantly use the Gregorian calendar. And that's how it is in our world. But what about yours? Do you need a calendar for your fantasy world? Do your characters need a way to tell time? Well, absolutely. But does your reader need to know what that calendar is? Maybe. And that's what I want to talk about today. How to create a custom calendar, and will it enhance your storytelling? Welcome to another episode of Just-in-Time Worldbuilding with your host, Marie Mullaney. Welcome to the new studio, and let's carry on with calendars. Let's start with, do you really need a custom calendar for your fantasy world? Sometimes simplicity is enough. Not every story requires a meticulously crafted calendar. If your plot doesn't hinge on specific dates or precise timekeeping, you might be fine sticking to general references like seasons. It's summer, it's fall, it's harvest season, and so on. You could even use something as simple as the phases of the moon to track time. This approach is straightforward, relatable, and keeps the focus on your story without burdening the reader with a complex timekeeping system they don't need to understand in order to consume your thematic concepts and enjoy your story. However, there are times when a custom calendar can truly elevate your world building. Imagine a world with not one moon but two, or seasons that stretch for decades, reshaping the lives of entire generations. Perhaps your culture revolves around intricate celestial events that deeply impact your plot. Or maybe it's a deeply ritualized society rooted in religious festivals tied to thematic concepts you're exploring. In these cases, creating a custom calendar isn't just a nice detail, it's an opportunity to tie your calendar directly to your plot, making it an intimate, living part of your world that truly stands out in the mind of the reader. So, before diving into the details of creating a custom calendar, which we'll get to shortly, ask yourself, does my story need a calendar? If the answer is yes, great, let's get started. If the answer is no, stick around anyway. There will be tips on how to write time in the last section. Okay, let's talk about the basics of calendars. Calendars are so ingrained in our daily lives that we rarely think about how they came to be, or why it's so natural to say, Happy New Year by the way, as we prepare to welcome 2025. But for world builders, understanding the basics of timekeeping can unlock amazing creative possibilities. To explore that, let's take a look at the calendars humans have developed over the ages, starting with the one we use every day, the Gregorian calendar. The Gregorian calendar is solar-based, designed to align Earth's journey around the sun with 365 days divided into 12 months. It accounts for Earth's wobble by adding an extra day every 4 years, giving us leap years. The Gregorian calendar was developed in part to correct seasonal drift. Well, it was developed from the Julian calendar, which was developed to correct seasonal drift. So, to explain seasonal drift, if you create a calendar based on the cycles of the moon, let's say for religious festivals, like the original Roman calendar, seasonal drift becomes a problem. This is because Earth's seasons align with its journey around the sun, not the moon's orbit around Earth. Over time, holidays tied to a lunar calendar drift out of sync with the seasons. For example, A harvest festival based on the 7th moon might eventually fall in winter and then in summer, and soon no one remembers why it's called a harvest festival when you can't harvest anything. Seasonal drift was one of the reasons Julius Caesar originally designed the solar-based Julian calendar, a reformation of the Roman calendar, which divided the year into 365 days with the months rather than moons. Later, Pope Gregory refined that Julian calendar to better account for Earth's wobble, introducing the leap year system we still use today. Most calendars in the world have some kind of agrarian base, since knowing when to plant and when to harvest is a really critical part of early civilizations, and that is simply carried forward into the future development of the civilization. However, that is not always the case. Let's explore a different timekeeping system, the Mayan calendar. This incredibly intricate system served to dictate religious festivals while also tracking the agrarian cycle. It consisted of two primary components. The Tzolk'in, a 260-day sacred calendar where each day had a unique name and associated rituals, and the Hab, a 365-day solar calendar that tracked the agricultural year, much like the Gregorian calendar, guiding planting and harvesting. These two calendars interlocked and overlapped every 52 solar years, forming a cycle known as the calendar round. Beyond that, the Mayans also used a long count to track time across millennia, leading to the famous 2012 "the world's gonna end" nonsense. Like, dudes, they probably just ran out of space. Let's be real. The sacred calendar, with its religious significance, highlights how central spirituality was to the Mayan culture. While the Hab functioned much like other agrarian calendars, the addition of the Tzolk'in and its integration into the calendar round added immense complexity. This complexity was managed by priests, making timekeeping a religious responsibility and placing celestial events and rituals at the heart of society. But what does this mean for fantasy world building? For a fantasy world with unique celestial mechanics, such as multiple moons or even multiple suns, timekeeping will naturally look different. But even in worlds with familiar celestial patterns, calendars can reflect the values and priorities of a culture. If your culture places a heavy emphasis on religion or sacred days, you might consider creating something as intricate as the Mayan calendar, with both sacred and agrarian components. This opens up fascinating possibilities for world building, such as tension between the calendars. What happens when the sacred and the secular calendar conflicts and you need harvest as well as ritual? Or there could be ritual consequences. There might be sacrifices or rituals tied to specific alignments. What happens if they are neglected? There could also be tie into societal structure. How does managing dual calendars shape religious and political authority? These dynamics can create natural points of tension or harmony in your world, enriching both your plot and your setting. So whether you stick to Earth's agrarian system or devise something entirely new based on your world's celestial bodies, understanding historical calendars gives you that strong foundation to build from. And now that we've got the basics out of the way, hit the thumbs up button and let's dive into how to build a custom calendar for your fantasy world, step by step. Let's start with building the structure of your fantasy calendar. The first step in creating your fantasy calendar is to decide on its building blocks. Every calendar begins with these fundamentals: how your world measures blocks of time. Here, we're not talking about hours in a day. I've already covered that in a previous video, which you can check out in the information card. Instead, we're focusing on the day as the shortest unit and how that expands into weeks, months, and years. So, what do you need to define for your calendar? First, you need to talk about how long a day is. It might be shorter than ours, perhaps 18 hours, or longer, stretching to 36. A day's length can influence everything from daily routines to how your people structure their lives. The next thing you need to consider is weeks. Do weeks exist in your world? While 7 days is common to us, the ancient Egyptians used a 10-day span. And some cultures didn't use weeks at all, instead organizing time solely within months or even seasons. And speaking of months, are your months tied to lunar phases or celestial events? Maybe there's another moon, star, or planet that creates a cycle your people track to take the place of months. And then the year. How long does it take your planet to orbit its star? Your year might be longer than Earth's, perhaps 450 days, or it could be shorter. If the orbit is highly elliptical, years might vary in length, creating dramatic shifts in season and affecting agriculture, traditions, and cultural rhythms. You should also consider the impact on daily life. When deciding these fundamentals, think about how they shape the lives of your people. Longer days might lead to shift-based sleeping patterns. Longer years could change how people mark age, milestones, and seasons. Eccentric orbits might create extremes, like George R.R. Martin's years-long season, or subtler variations, such as alternating long and short years that affect harvest cycles. While designing these aspects, remember that while a unique calendar adds a foreign and immersive feel to your world, it can also create a barrier for your reader in consuming your story. In order to justify this complexity, ensure that your calendar influences the cultures of your world and that its impact is shown naturally through your storytelling. And one way to do that is through naming, which gives you an opportunity to reflect your world's personality. A well-crafted naming system for your calendar can subtly infuse your world's mythology, culture, and history into the calendar, creating depth without overwhelming the reader. Consider the following naming strategies for elements of your calendar. 1. Draw inspiration from mythology. Use your world's gods, heroes, or mythical creatures. For instance, months or weekdays might honor a goddess of the harvest or legendary figures from your culture's lore. 2. Use natural cycles and phenomena. Base names on observable natural cycles or celestial events. Evocative names like snow fade or rain fire could represent seasons or specific times of the year. For example, in Finnish, November is called marrasku, or the month of dying, referencing the slaughter of animals that wouldn't survive the winter. 3. Use historical or cultural influences. In a post-catastrophic world, months could be named after significant events like the Shattering or the Month of Rebirth. This not only grounds your calendar in the history of your world, but also gives readers insight into your culture's past. The key is to make names feel authentic and relevant to your world's culture. And speaking of culture, now that we've built the structure of your calendar, let's dive into how your calendar reflects the cultural and societal elements of your world. Timekeeping does more than mark the passage of days. It shapes societies and reflects their priorities. For example, in a seafaring culture, the new year might begin with the first spring tide after the stormy season. In an agrarian culture, it's likely tied to the planting season, often in early spring or midwinter, as it is in our own world. In a desert society where daily cycles revolve around extreme heat, days might be counted from sunrise to sunrise instead of midnight to midnight, reflecting the practical realities of life in such an environment. How time is marked is equally important to cultures. In your world, celestial events like a lunar eclipse might signal a month of fasting or feasting. A solar solstice could mark the start of a new year. These markers tie your calendar to the physical and spiritual world of your setting, giving readers a tangible sense of culture. And if you're interested in incorporating festivals into your world building, check out my video on that topic for further inspiration. But how societies track years is equally important and a great means to organically share your culture's history with the reader. So let's explore that in more detail. Societies throughout history have used various methods to track years. Let's check out the Roman Republic for some great examples of tracking years. They used consular years. In ancient Rome, years were commonly tracked by the names of the two consuls elected to lead the state. For example, they might say, in the year of the consulship of Marcus Tullius Caesario and Gaius Antonius Hybrida, which corresponds to 63 BC in our modern system. This method tied timekeeping to political events, making it practical for contemporary records, but cumbersome for longer historical timelines. In your world, you could adapt this system using leaders, rulers, or significant figures to define years. The year of Queen Marie, the year of the High Arbiter, or the year of the Golden Conqueror. But Rome did adjust somewhat because of, as I said, this historical problem, and that takes us to dating from a founding event. The Romans also used the ab urbe condita system, which counted years from the traditional founding of Rome in 753 BCE. Similarly, you could define a calendar starting from a key event in your world's history, such as the founding of an empire, a great migration, or a celestial alignment. I use this kind of system in my Sangwheel Chronicles series, where the Northern Continent's calendar begins with the founding of their empire, the Empire of Lumiaron. This system offers a sense of continuity and cultural pride, but like the Roman model, may reflect a pretty arbitrary choice of starting date. It's highly unlikely that there was no Rome in 754 BC and suddenly it pops up in 753 BC. History is rarely that neat. But calendar makers find it easy to make it that neat, and so can world builders when creating a calendar. And that leads us to 3, event-based timekeeping. Romans also referred to significant historical events to define time. For example, the year after the Battle of Cannae, or the 5th year of the Second Punic War. This relative system tied years to events in oral history, making it easy to contextualize time without formal numbering. This method is especially useful for world builders as it allows you to weave historical context into your story naturally, giving readers a sense of your world's timeline without overwhelming them with numbers. A 4th strategy is religious and civic calendars. The Roman calendar originally tied months to religious and agrarian cycles, with names reflecting their purpose, such as Martius, dedicated to Mars, or Ianarius, dedicated to Janus. However, the early Roman calendar was chaotic as fuck, with only 304 days and an unaccounted 60-day gap. Religious leaders exploited the system for political gain, leading to such confusion that Julius Caesar eventually had to overhaul it entirely. And his reforms gave us the Julian calendar, which evolved into the Gregorian. So, For your world, consider whether religious or civic leaders control timekeeping, and does their influence create harmony or tension within society? Is timekeeping tied to religious festivals, political power, or practical concerns like farming cycles? And can you use it as political tension? So, when designing the broader framework of your calendar, think about how people would refer to years in everyday life, like named years based on rulers, leaders, or events. The year of the Silver King, the harvest of storms. Celestial cycles, similar to the Chinese zodiac, with repeating cycles named after animals or spirits or gods or celestial phenomena. The year of the dragon, the year of twin suns, etc. Event-based context, tying your years to major historical or cultural events. 5 years after the Great Flood, or the year the phoenix rose in the north. These approaches help to contextualize time in ways that feel natural and culturally relevant, offering both depth and clarity to your world. Of course, calendars aren't solely shaped by culture. The physical realities of your world, its moons, suns, and celestial mechanics, play a significant role. For instance, a world with multiple moons or suns introduces unique challenges and opportunities for timekeeping. And since this is a fantasy world-building channel, let's return to the fantastical and explore how worlds with multiple celestial bodies might shape their calendars. I've covered worlds with multiple moons and multiple suns in previous videos, which you can check out in the information cards. For the purpose of crafting a calendar, let's focus on how these celestial bodies influence timekeeping and, by extension, your culture. Calendars often originate as tools for guiding practical activities. When to plant crops, when to fish, when to migrate with the herds in a nomadic culture, etc. This foundational purpose shapes the structure of your calendar. With multiple suns, for example, your seasons might be dramatically affected alongside your day-night cycle. For instance, you might have alternating daylight patterns, long stretches of darkness, or periods of extreme heat. These changes would define the rhythm of planting, harvesting, and other agrarian activities. A culture might build its calendar around these alternating light cycles, or it could create festivals tied to the extended periods of daylight or night. Multiple moons, on the other hand, could influence planting seasons, but may have an even greater effect on a seafaring or fishing culture. Tides might become more extreme, with double or triple moon spring tides and complex neap tides dictating the timing of maritime activities. Also consider the moon cycles. What if one moon has a 30-day cycle and another a 45-day cycle? Does the culture reconcile these differences, or do they ignore one of the moons entirely for timekeeping? Perhaps each moon is tied to a different aspect of life, agrarian for the one and religious for the other. You could even mimic the Mayan system, where the moon cycles unify at specific intervals, creating monumental events, such as a massive tide that signals the new year, or a once-in-a-lifetime festival. And then you could have the Festival of Two Moons. But this is fantasy. More than just multiple celestial events can be at play in your world. So let's push the boundaries of creativity a little. What about having celestial wobbles like Earth's wobble? Your world might have a phenomena that creates an extra day or unaligned period. This could be considered a sacred time. Or maybe it's an ideal time for secret rituals. Perhaps it's a day outside of time when the normal rules of society don't apply. You could also have unmarked days. Inspired by the Romans who left that 60-day gap in your calendar, your culture could have periods of undefined or suspended time. These might be controlled by temples or politicians, used strategically for religious or political gain. Or your calendar could be marked by fantasy elements. Imagine a creature that rises from the earth once a year to signal the new year. Or there could be an artifact that simmers at the solstices, marking celestial alignment. Or maybe in a post-apocalyptic world, an ancient clock tower might track the years, sending a signal across the land to mark the turning of the calendar. And what happens if this clock breaks? How does society adapt when the mechanism defining time itself ceases to function? These fantastical elements allow you to make your calendar unique and memorable, elevating it beyond a simple organizational tool into a defining aspect of your world. The beauty of fantasy world building is that you can explore ideas far beyond historical precedents. Whether your calendar reflects the complex motions of celestial bodies or is built around a magical or cultural phenomena, it should feel integral to your world, as ours does to ours. If you've created a fantasy calendar, I'd love to hear about it. Share your favorite ideas in the comments below. And let's move on to our last critical question. How do you write about your calendar so that it enhances your world without alienating your reader? Winter is coming. The words of House Stark from George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire are not just a family motto. They're an expression deeply tied to the calendar and seasons of that world with its unique system of long, unpredictable seasons. The calendar of Westeros also counts the years from the founding of King's Landing, marking when Aegon the Conqueror descended with his dragons to unify the Seven Kingdoms and establish his rule. What Martin demonstrates brilliantly is how to create a calendar that feels immersive to the reader. And here are 5 strategies to do the same in your story. 1. Festivals and seasonal markers. Incorporate festivals and events that align with your world's calendar to naturally show the passage of time. For example, in David Eddings' Tamuli series, a harvest festival serves as the backdrop for an empire-wide assassination attempt. This event ties directly to the calendar, making the timing clear and relatable to readers. Harvest season means autumn. In your world, festivals could be tied to natural phenomena like a double moonrise or a solar eclipse, which signal specific points in your calendar. By showing characters preparing for or participating in these festivals, you can seamlessly communicate the time of year without resorting to explicit explanations to the reader. Show, don't tell. 2. Idioms and expressions. Develop idioms that reflect your world's unique approach to timekeeping, like Martin's "Winter is coming," which captures the ominous inevitability of the long seasons in Westeros. In your world, create sayings that draw from your calendar's quirks, such as "waiting for the twin moons to align," indicating a rare, prolonged wait like our expression of "once in a blue moon." Or you could use an expression as fleeting as a sun's blink, describing something very brief if you have 2 suns with very little darkness. These idioms subtly embed your calendar into daily language and reflect how your culture perceives time. 3. Tie daily activities and routines to your calendar. Show your calendar's structure by depicting tasks tied to the rhythms of the calendar. For example, you could have market days with characters preparing for weekly markets that naturally establishes the concept of a week in your culture. Or you could use religious observances. Regular rituals or ceremonies tied to specific days or months can mark time and signal its passage to the reader. Or you could highlight the agrarian cycle. Harvesting, planting, or seasonal migrations show the influence of the calendar on your world's economy and the cultures of your characters. These relatable, repeatable activities ground the reader in your world's temporal framework. And strategy number 4, you could use environmental descriptions. Align your descriptions of nature with your calendar's seasons to create vivid imagery. So what I mean by this is, as an example, the crimson leaves of Bloodfall blanketed the forest tells the reader that Bloodfall is a month in autumn. Or the twin suns scorched the land, heralding the onset of the drying season. This signals an approach of a hot season that is tied to your calendar. Such descriptions evoke a strong sense of time and place, keeping your reader anchored in your world. And finally, but most importantly, you can use historical references. Use your calendar to weave history and culture into your narrative. This doesn't just show your calendar, it also allows you to naturally bring the history of your world and culture into the story for the reader's enjoyment. So, for example, you might say, born in the 5th year of King Eric's reign, or since the great eclipse 2 decades ago. Characters can reference key events or eras in your world's dating system, naturally revealing its chronology and significant moments. This approach enriches your storytelling, giving readers context for past events while rooting them in the present timeline. And by embedding your calendar into the fabric of your world through festivals, idioms, daily routine, environmental cues, and historical references, you make it a seamless part of the reader's experience. Instead of presenting your calendar as a barrier to entry, you integrate it organically into the story, enhancing immersion and world building. And those are my thoughts on creating custom calendars for fantasy worlds. If you've enjoyed this video, please do hit that thumbs up button and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you'd like to check out my own calendars and timekeeping systems and support the channel, take a look at my books, linked down below in the description. I've got a science fantasy novel, I have a spicy fairy tale novellas, and I have my epic fantasy series, Sangwheel Chronicles. And speaking of support, thank you to all the members of the channel who not only get early access to these videos, but also help me feed my cats every day. And a very big shout out to Lupex Lakeshire, Katie Kofi Mug, and Tony Lamana, just-in-timers of the Build It in Stone level, and to Pablo Barrios, Patricio, Aya Shimaru, Tiffany Felix, and Dylan Batera, just-in-timers of the Build It in Wood level. And if you're hungry for more world building, check out my video on creating the history of your world, or whatever the algorithm is recommending for you right now. And I will see you soon for another episode from Just in Time World Building. Also, welcome to the new studio. Damn, that is bright lights. I am having a fun time recording this cutout. Okay. Welcome to the new studio, and I hope that it smells like new studio and that you have enjoyed your Saturdays off because we are back to our normal schedule, my move being complete. I really need to figure out why this jacket is shining like that. I look positively golden on this camera. Anyway,